Hey guys, some gamer dude here. I was meaning to do a follow-up video for Flesh and Blood, clearing up some things I got clarified by Legend Story Studios. But before I got around to sitting down and scripting that, I had the opportunity to go down to my LGS and try the game out. Because of this, I thought my time would be better spent with a review. Flesh and Blood is a fighting game card game in the vein of Universal Fighting System from Legend Story Studios, a company based out of New Zealand. The goal of the game is to deplete your opponent's hero's life to zero. Like Final Fantasy last week, we have to discuss an art issue before we go into the game itself. The art by itself is quite nice. The character designs are appealing with good use of colour and are well constructed. I said as much when I first talked about the game, but the game as a whole has a quirk. Cycles of cards aren't unusual for card games, but the way Fab does it is very unusual. A cycle for Fab means something very different than what it does for Magic. Where in Magic it'd be a card in each colour with a similar theme, Flesh and Blood makes the same card 3 times, just with scaling resources to power. I'll talk about this more later when I get to how the game plays, but what it means for now is that statistically stronger cards produce less resources, while statistically weaker cards produce more resources. This has no bearing on the effect strength or card cost. The cards are the same in terms of cost and effect on every version. Last week I defended Square Enix's art decisions because they allowed the game to be made with minimal cost. As I said then, art is the most expensive part of a game. But this I won't defend. The longer I've had to think about it, as well as other statements made by Legend and some other quirks of Fab, it's cheaply produced filler. Legend has openly said that certain versions of cards will be more desirable than others, and if you mention a card, it will likely default to a specific version in discussion, insinuating that the other versions are useless chaff. Added to this is the collector bent of the game. While these cycles are only in common and rare, this game also does the "we chip you an uncommon and call it a rare thing" Bakugan does. The effort shown in expanding the set in such a cheap and lazy way shows that they are trying to make their cards harder to get by inserting pointless trash into the set. I'm not a fan of purposely trash cards, but at least Magic has something of a reason in draft, and put effort in terms of semi-unique cards and artwork. This is literally just padding for padding's sake, and it's a massive turn-off. If these cards had been made with other characters later on in mind, and they had said as such, or some support to make the lesser versions not trash existed, my opinion wouldn't be so negative. But the open admission that it's chaff for padding, it's indefensible. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. I went in with knowledge of the artwork padding issue and was hoping that the game would be so good that padding could be excused. As I said, the game bears a lot of similarities to Universal Fighting System, now Universes, starting with the character card having a unique hand and starting life value, though no character in set 1 is unique in terms of stats. Each character comes with a class they represent and can only use cards from that class or generic ones. In addition to their deck, each character also comes with a weapon and a set of armor. Weapons are associated with the character's class and provides an extra attack without using a card from hand, while armor provides additional defensive options. The game starts with both players drawing tell their character's hand size and deciding who goes first. The starting player gets to make an action, which is most likely going to be an attack. If the attack has a cost indicated by the top right of the card or the text of the weapon, it's paid by pitching a card to the pitch zone. The amount of resources the pitch card produces is indicated by the colour on the top of the card and icons on the top left. The resources pool for the entire turn, so a 3 resource card can provide a decent amount of value. Your opponent now has the chance to block the attack. Each card has 2 values down the bottom, a value for damage and a value for defending. Unlike attacking, damage doesn't cost resources and you can use multiple cards to defend yourself. Any spillover damage is inflicted to the defending player. Every attack has trample, and if the action the turn player is making has go again, they gain another action. This goes on until the turn player passes, at which point they can place a card face down into their arsenal, a zone for attacks and action cards that a player wants to hold onto for later use. They then draw cards till their hand size and their turn ends. Cards in pitch go to the bottom of the deck, weapons and armor return to their respective zones, and all other cards in the chain are discarded. This goes back and forth until a player gives up. Not loses, but gives up. Flesh and Blood has a major flaw. I sincerely doubt it spent the alleged 7 years in development, and if it did, there are some serious issues with the developers and or playtesters. The game starts fine. You have full hands, you have full life, you can roll with the punches. You don't care to block because you have plenty of life and want to attack. Then the game goes on, and you are presented with a problem. The only way to continue the game is to defend, because your life is now too low to roll with the punches. You realise you can't mount a counter-attack as your entire hand is spent defending, and because of that, you give up. No point continuing, just submit. It feels horrible as an experience. I could tell halfway through my first game that this was an issue. I thought to myself, why would I ever defend? The attacks are so heavy, and I need to expend large amounts of hand to defend, completely removing my ability to attack. So I just take it like a man and try to race past the opponent. Slower characters seem to have an advantage here, since their attacks are so strong that they can feasibly early guard a couple of attacks per round, and still swing like a truck, which seems like a superior strategy since all attacks have trample. Why make a multitude of attacks eating your hand when you can just make one big attack that takes your opponent a ton of hand to stop? Even better if they have hit effects. Blocking is bad in this game, and it ruins the entire experience. It's not like I don't get it. You're not meant to go in whole hog. You're meant to strategically attack a couple of times, chuck a card into arsenal and pass, split your hand between 2 turns, use 2 to block so you die more gradually, keeping 2 back to pay for pitch and 1 attack on top of your weapon, maybe 2 if you saved something in the arsenal. But the same thing eventuates. You have to use your entire hand to hold on. You can't arsenal, you can't attack, you give up. Your opponent doesn't really win unless you are gracious and let them have that final strike you saw a couple of turns back. The game simply doesn't feel good to play. It's frustrating. The thing is, this is by design. Flesh and Blood is said by Legend to be a game designed with you starting with all resources and winding down as the game closes out. The reverse of what other games do where things escalate. You become exhausted. Interesting idea, and the game replicates it well. It does feel like you're exhausted by the end. But we have a case here where the flavour is a bad thing. The act of winding down made me not want to touch it again because the end was so anticlimactic and miserable. I set out to buy all 4 decks. I walked out with magic cards instead. The game's shit, is what I'm trying to say. Up there with the spoils. Not as bad, not much better. Easily the worst fighting game card game, and I've played them all but WWE Raw Deal. I need to try Raw Deal. It's got some rave reviews. I could harp on about the drop rates and the amounts of higher than rare cards. I could harp on about calling uncommons rares and giving you less than norm. I could harp on about massive first turn advantage. There are a few other points I could talk about, but there is literally no point talking about them when the game is such a miserable experience. Why care to talk about these things when I don't want to play it? I've been fairly hard to Universal Fighting System in the past. The game's got a pretty vertical learning curve, and that's hard to get past. Sabretooth, Fantasy Flight, and now Jasco do a great disservice to UFS by not having articles to help people adjust to UFS's gameplay and decision making. All of that said, UFS is magnitudes of times better as a game than Flesh and Blood. I didn't think I'd say that given I prefer the pitch system over control checks and foundations, but here we are. UFS's speed mechanic for blocks just feels and works better. It actually works for a start. UFS, when you get your head around it, feels better, period. If anything, I developed a new appreciation for UFS by trying Flesh and Blood. I know a lot of game devs have very thin skin. They see any criticism of their game as a personal attack on them and become hostile. I could say this from personal experience. Don't. Take it as a criticism of your work and fix it. You end up with games like Flesh and Blood without criticism. Something that's clearly had a lot of money put behind it and plays as if it's unfinished, or no one said the winding down concept feels terrible. This has been Some Gamer Dude, and thanks for watching.